Okay, great.
Novelette, thank you so much for wanting to be part of this conversation. As you well know, having been to St. James's and having seen the variety of events and works of art and a monument that are celebrating and honoring Kwabna Ottawa Cugoano, we are right now on the 21st of August remembering Cugoano's baptism at St. James's in 1773 on the 20th of August, 251 years ago. Wonderful. I am honored that you accepted the invitation to be in this conversation because of your expertise and also because of your role in the Church of England right now. Would you like to share a little bit about what you do, about your perspective, about professionally and personally where you come from, and why you wanted to have this conversation?
Yes, I presently sit as a member of the CFCE, which is the Cathedral Fabrics Commission for England. And we look at alterations and development in churches. And also to their, in cathedrals, and also to their fabrics. We try to keep it sustainable. And we are a group that consists of architects and surveyors and art historians. And we are, as my daughter calls it, the art commissioners of the church. I also sit as head of the Contested Heritage, the chair of the Contested Heritage Committee. And our response is to work with churches who are, and cathedrals who find themselves challenged by, shall we say, the material culture of people who have engaged, that's, associated with people who have engaged as, let's say, slave traffickers, who have done, just say, things that are against our mission or the church's mission and the understanding of God, or what we as Christians understand as godly pursuits. And you can say, well, that has to do with times, because let's face it, in the church, appreciate and kind of condone slavery under the Hamite movements and all those other things. Yes, we did. And we meaning the church, and everyone in the church, because they took their lead from the church. But there were also voices within the church, voices that said, no, this is not on. Voices who said, these are people. And what we're now looking at is helping people work to resolve those tensions and those histories. It is a difficult road, because narratives have told us that we're the good guys. When we speak about slavery, we always get, well, Clarkson was wonderful. He got all of these people out from the United States, go to Nova Scotia, establish this, Wilberforce and this and that. It goes on and on and on and on. And the history that has been presented is Church of England being the good guys, people in the Church of England, the good guys. And so we get to this concept of competing narratives. Well, yes, this may be a good guy in the sense that you now know him as a wonderful person, because despite all the atrocities that he did and all the sinful things that he committed against fellow human beings, he gave a lot of money. He gave a lot of money to have, people say mass for him. He gave a lot of money to education. He gave a lot of money to businesses. And so people say, well, and I remember a wonderful Daily Mail headline that said, the slave owners also did a lot of work for charity or something along those lines.
That comes
So
up a lot, doesn't it? Where
it
it's
does come
like,
up a
but
lot.
don't forget the good they did.
They did the good they
And
did.
that's so complex. There's a phrase that we often use at St. James's Piccadilly, which is telling our story honestly, that there's something so deep and so complex about truth, how to be honest about the past, about the present. What's your sense of that in relation to what you're sharing?
I think it is a brave person who says, I don't know. It is a brave person who says, listen, teach me, I want to get to some truth. And because frankly, people say, I'm sharing honestly, but am I really listening to what other people are saying? Am I actually, taking in what other people are telling me? We all perceive things in our own way. We all interpret things in our own way. So a person can think, I'm being the most truthful person out there. I'm being a just person out there, but they're also looking at it from their own viewpoints, their own litmus test of what constitute truths. Don't want to hear about that. No. That's a bit too much, a bit contentious. No. That kind of thing.
For Cugoano in his later life, so we know that he was baptized when he was a teenager here in this church. And then in 1787, he wrote a book on thoughts and sentiments of the evil of slavery, the evil of the slave trade. I'm always compelled by that title because he talks about not only thinking, but also feeling, the head and the heart. And I wonder what you think of that in terms of Christianity, faith, and the way that Cugoano uses the Bible as well as his own story to say it is both my truth, the truth of an individual in relation to abolition and the honest story. It is also the truth of Christianity.
Yes.
Where do you think that sits in terms of truth and Cugoano, how justice, anti-racism, and truth are mixed together in his 18th century moment in his writing, and perhaps in our moment too, if we can?
I think it's a positivism. He's been because as you know, people didn't think he wrote the book. There were certain people who thought he just didn't write the book. It couldn't come out of. So he has to deal with his own truth, I think, but he's defiant. By writing something, he forces us to be introspective as Christians. He challenges us to, if this is Christianity, then we should do this. And then you sit there and you say, oh, well, I can love my neighbor, but I'm not going to invest in the humanity of my neighbor. You can't do that. You can't reconcile that as Christians. And I think that is what he brought slavery to the doorsteps of the people who probably, given where St. James Piccadilly was located, I'm sure people were interested in the trade.
Absolutely. No
And
question.
so,
there are people in these pews and on these streets who benefited directly, and also who were making arguments against, for sure. And that they're in this building and that they're moving around in this neighborhood, as is the case in many other places in Britain, many, not just in London, right? I'm thinking about Bristol, where I know you have great expertise, Liverpool, and also in these little parishes, in these very, quite rural parts of England. There's a debate to, from Cugoano's point of view, insist that his personal story as well as his theology, in order to, absolutely, make it so plain for people that it is not possible to support enslavement and
Exactly.
to be a Christian. You can't have both. He's
You
just
can't
like,
have
this is
both.
simple.
And so he speaks to that inconsistency, and he speaks about the fact that you can't pick and choose. And a lot of people did pick and choose. They pick and choose by doing things like, I don't want to hear about that part. You know, slaves just arrived. They don't hear about the Middle Passage. They don't hear. I mean, this is one of the reasons why the depiction of people's being bound in the mid-passage in the cargo ship was so offensive, as the person had to, you know, the person who drew it, I forgot his name right now, sorry, actually did this almost covertly, had to do it covertly, because that's reality. That is reality. You go to you know, certain churches, and you will have bowing Africans weeping at the you know, at the demise of this as a plaque, as the demise of their slave keeper. Why? Because it is, you know, people think, oh, we're doing good. They would either eat themselves, they would, you know, eat each other, they would either kill each other, and we are now, you know, using these people to save their souls. We're talking within the context of Christianity, and to some kind of redemption, if you believed in Hamite theory, and this is a part of a journey that they can make, that they should make as Hamites, and all the other excuses in the book, other than saying, as Christians, should we not do this? And it's the same thread that follows us today. When I hear people recite the, you know, the, what is it, you know, what is it? The past is a foreign country refrain, or something similar to that, where they didn't really know. And I've said to people, I've expected that. I am not saying that in the 17th century, I mean, the 18th century, these people had Google. They did not live in the world of Google. They couldn't say, oh, let's look at the slave here and there. That didn't exist. But people knew. And I have found myself in a very heated debate, but with a person who went on about people didn't know to the extent. And I kept thinking, yes, but the Quakers were doing this, this was happening, all these other people, there were all these things going on. And I actually had to say to her, though I'm not, you know, a theologian, I turned around and I said to her, do you remember the story of Lazarus? And she said, what? And I said, Lazarus, do you know the one who was in the rich man in hell and Lazarus in heaven? And the rich man, being very privileged, still in hell, said, bring Lazarus down so he can put water on my lips. And she was just looking at me because I do kind of go sometimes. And she said, yes. And I said, yes. And God said, no, Lazarus, don't do this. And then the rich man said, well, if you won't let him do that, still being privileged, let him go and speak to my brothers. And God's response was, did I not send my prophets? Did I not? And there were all these, not I wouldn't say prophets, but there were all these people walking around saying, this is a bad thing. This is what happens to people. These are human beings. These are not animals. These are whatever. So how could you pick and choose? That is what I like about, he holds no bars. He's saying, this is how I was taken. I had a life as well. You know, this is how I was brought in. This is how I was treated. You know, and yes, I was brought up, but frankly, I don't know to what extent was it the Somerset verdict or whatever it is that freed him. To what extent people just thought, oh, get rid of him, he's a, you know, he is, you know, it's going to be something because they're going to be emancipated anyway. I don't know.
Wow. And I wanted to ask you about that because one of the opportunities I think we have with exploring and bringing to light in a new way Cugoano's story is that it's a story that's connected to this place particularly because of baptism. And there's this utter myth, right? That there's this strong connection between baptism in the Church of England and liberation. And the complexity around that is something that's been illuminated by a number of people. I've been really grateful for this. That, of course, at the same time, the Church of England had a plantation, absolutely huge. And the Codrington College in Barbados is still named after that. There's an incredible amount of profound this, not only historically, but also moment by moment, theologically, in terms of communities. And that comes back to honesty for me. And you were talking before about the Church of England saying, aren't we great, by highlighting the story of Wilberforce, highlighting the story of Clarkson. And if we stop there without looking at the deeper layers of the complicit and even the sort of histories of encouragement and of profiteering, that reality of the Church of England and the way that we, you know, I'm a Church of England priest, benefited institutionally and in many cases personally from the systematic, intentional, visible dehumanization of a huge number of people. And so that thing about, oh, but we didn't know. And it's like, partly that's about not being curious as well. Every time you put sugar in your tea in England in the late 18th century, if you have no curiosity whatsoever about where it comes from, when there is absolutely a wider narrative about that, one cannot say we didn't know. That's not possible. And so how that gets illuminated in a different way today in order to help us to make connections about the 21st century legacies, the visibility of that in our churches and in wider society, that feels precious to me. And I wanted to ask you about the arts in relation to this, because that's also where you started in terms of your role in the church. And we were delighted at St. James's that you were one of the people who came when last September we kind of unveiled, we launched these new paintings as a permanent commission in the narthex at St. James's by the artist Che Lovelace, who's from Trinidad, that's where he works. First monument to Cugoano anywhere, as far as we know. And also this, you know, permanent commission by a contemporary artist who, together with his family, has a major impact on the relationship between art and culture and a deeply international public conversation. And I wonder whether or not I could share my screen and we could talk about art for a moment in relation to the insights that you have and the expertise you share. Shall we hop over?
Please do.
Perfect. Okay, this might be a little clunky, but let's see. We should be fine. There we go.
I love these.
And I'm going to expand that. That's good. Yes. Can you see that?
I do. Okay. And, you know, it's, to me, I love the water in this, but I also loved the fact that it is very edgy. And there is, I'm trying to remember the phrase that says history isn't finished and sorted. It's quite edgy or something like this. And I loved it. I loved it primarily because it is, shall we say, a self-fulfillment. It is the fact of, well, of course, to me, it's baptism, but at the same time, it is about reclaiming oneself and one's roots and one's positionality. So I truly, truly loved it. I love the color scheme, particularly because the color scheme actually is speaking. You've got this wonderful, and I'm not talking because it's pastel, but because it is radiating people. It is about people interacting, intermingling with that color scheme. It is about being one with nature, about a simple life, I think a godly life, where you know who you are. So to me, I mean, there is, of course, the turbulence that I see in the second one. And it did really impress on me, that second one. Because I kept thinking, being plucked, taken away, drowning. But are you drowning? Are you, what are you drowning in? Are you drowning in the water? Are you drowning in, just the loss of opportunity? Are you just foundering? That's the thing. The third one, to me, was with the figure like this. I'm still in that narrative of person being taken and being redeemed. But at the same time, I also see the person in what seems to me in joyous repose at the back. So it could also be that somebody is being pulled up. So there is the initiation, the submersion, and then the shall we say, the bringing forth of that person. I must tell you, the fourth one, I'm still trying to think, work it out in terms of birds and freedoms and all the other things. But I felt overall, one thing I liked about it is that it could be anywhere. It could be in the Caribbean, it could be in Grenada, it could be, it could be anywhere. And because of that, it spoke to a Black diasporan understanding of life and, shall we say, journeys. I just haven't figured out the various journeys because, very much as we said, there are competing narratives here.
Yeah. I spend a lot of time with these works of art. I see them most days, and they're in a part of the church that also, like, both doors on either side are open every day. So it's like a cut through. Yeah. So like people go through, but they don't go into the church, and often they're on their phone, or they've got some food, or they're talking to their colleague. And what I've noticed is that, there are also people who stop, who look. And there are also folks who, whether it's in the context of a service or a concert, or if they're just passing by and they're surprised, they've had a really big emotional reaction. And when I've ended up in a conversation with someone who has deep feelings about it and wants to share them, a number of times it's because they're not expecting to see people of color simply living joyously, and to have that as kind of the first statement of really quite big, bold works of art in a church. For them, it's a juxtaposition that's both heart-opening and heartbreaking in a way that they did not expect in themselves. And so there's that in my mind. The other thing I'm remembering is that I gave a tour for some teenagers at a nearby school a little while ago. And we were looking at these, and I was quiet for a while, and I said, just take a look, reflect, and then if you'd like to, share with the group what you see. And there was someone who was about 14 years old who said, I see in my imagination a world where the transatlantic chattel slave trade never existed. And so these are people who are living their lives freely, never having had to imagine for themselves or go through what Cugoano and so many untold people with the names we don't know, what they went through, what they endured. And I was amazed because this is a 14-year-old person who was just saying, oh, this is what I see. And it really stuck with me, those two experiences of people as individuals being quite emotionally overwhelmed and them being surprised by their reaction. And this response from this young teenager to what they were perceiving. What do you think of those things as kind of just responses to these works of art and to the story theologically and biographically, I suppose, that they represent?
Biographically, I think that young man is a wonderful future art critic. And or young lady is a wonderful future art critic. You see, I see baptism in this, but I also see somebody being victorious. I see empowerment in this. And whether, as I said, I don't know whether or not the water is supposed to be what he is, water is supposed to represent. It could be struggles. It may not, it could be the Middle Passage. It could be anything. If I'm relating it to Cugoano, it could be any of that.
Mm.
But what I am certain of in the very end is that the people are jubilant and victorious by the third panel, and by the fourth panel, free to discover anything they want through transformation into birds or whatever. And that is what I get from this. And it is interesting that you say your congregation. I think because I've grown up in the States and I've seen a lot of Harlem Renaissance and a lot of other things, I've always seen this. And one of the first things I thought of this when I saw this was Alvin Haley and Alvin Haley's Revelation.
Can you say a bit more about that? There are lots of people in the UK who will be like, what's that? So could you describe it for a moment?
Alvin Haley company is a major Black company in the United States that great dancers like Judith Jameson has come up to, but he is a magnificent choreographer. And one of the things that he has is Revelation, which is, I think, a 3-part to Revelation. And part of it, which they dance to, is, God's going to trouble you in the water, wade in the water. And so wading in the water, which is God troubling the water, because you can't really, God's, when you baptize somebody, the water must be, there must be turbulence. There's the Spirit of God in the water.
Yes.
And so seeing that, I automatically thought, this reminds me of Revelations, which is one of the pieces that, that's danced, where it is about, all about baptism and the journeys that we made. So that was the first thing that clicked in my head when I saw it.
Yeah.
But then I had to uncouple it because I knew I was bringing my own, so that I had to view the work as its own right. And I liked it because there is, I liked it because it has a transcendent quality about it. It is about transcendence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, going to your question of whether or not Cugoano was what I could see, I see a man who's transcended weighted down by by history, the color of his skin, the lack of expectation, and I see him because you keep thinking. I also see him in communion. I see him communion very much with the first and the third, in the sense that we have the Son of Africa's that he's working with. There is this symbiotic relationship that's going on. So to me, there is this journey that people understand they have to make, but are making.
Mm.
And that's the strength of it.
Yeah, I love the connection to the Sons of Africa as well, that in the 18th century, there are a number of people who are raising their voices as Black people who have been through this themselves, people like Cugoano alongside Cugoano. That is a very different story from often the, if I dare put it this way, the white heroism of the 18th century abolitionists that people in the Church of England tend to remember more easily. And so I think there's something about community and transcendence in these paintings that takes me back into that experience of Cugoano as an individual who knows he has a story, he knows that he can and will make a difference. And also the idea of the body of Christ. In baptism, we are all united to every generation of Christian, past, present, and future. The sense of the fragmentation of the suffering and pain of humanity is always in Christianity, always tangled up with the possibility of the true freedom of God through baptism. And these paintings, with all their power and light and vibrancy, seem to open up that conversation in such a surprising way. And so I have one final question for you. And again, you know, taking you back into your expertise, the way in which you work with architecture and sacred spaces and material culture and contested heritage, there is also a monument, a plaque to Cugoano in the church at St. James's. And it does not have his dates on it like most other monuments do, because we don't know quite for sure the year when he was born in what's now Ghana. And we don't know the year that he died. So the lack of information is a kind of present absence in this plaque. He's described as an author, as an abolitionist, as an activist, and the title of his book is on that monument. So it's his name, his vocation, what he wrote, his legacy as a Christian, as a thinker, as a theologian. And so that seems powerful to me in relation to these paintings as well, which I hope give us impetus for the beginning of conversations, the beginning of journeying in a better way, in a new way, imagining the world to be a better place, rather than sometimes what happens where you have like an anniversary, and then in a church or a cathedral, you have a big project for an anniversary, and then you put something on the wall, and then everybody says, hey, we did it, and then you never talk about it ever again. These, I hope, are a sign of commitment. And we don't always get it right. There will be, you know, difficulty across the way. It's a commitment to make an attempt to be serious about anti-racism and about the legacies of the enslavement of individuals that are still pressing upon us economically, socially, denominationally today. And so all that wrapped together, my question is, what difference does it make that these works of art are in a Church of England church? They could be in Tate Modern. They could be somewhere else entirely. They could be in someone's home. What difference does it make to you that these, as a permanent commission, together with the plaque, the monument, they're in a 17th century Church of England church, some of the funding for which almost certainly comes from the legacies of enslavement? What does that mean to you?
It means that the church, in a way, you know, Cugoano, challenged us. The church has accepted the challenge. The church is, by its very nature, a space which offers redemption. But in this case, the church is seeking redemption in itself, for itself. And it's about recognition. And it's about being humbled as Christians. And about also a warning for us as Christians that there for the grace of God go I on two ways. First, because yes, we can say this person, lived in a certain place and he is, he was Black and that's it. But we really got to understand that, in my mind, touching on what Cugoano wrote, evil is something that is manifested and takes various shape. It's a challenge to realize that we are human. We are not Christians, but working to be Christians every day. Being a Christian is not a done deal.
Yeah.
You don't say, well, I'm a Christian now and find everything else I've done. It is about making choices. And I don't know if I keep this readily. She gets up. I didn't think I would need this, but this is one of my, and this comes from, I don't know if you remember this, it's called The Broad and the Narrow, not the greatest bit of art.
Can you hold it up a bit closer?
The Broad and the Narrow.
Okay. All right.
And it starts out with people, very Victorian concept, going out, and here is God, and this is a very narrow road.
Yeah.
And there are all the choices that you can make, including being nasty to animals and all these other things along the line. And the broad and the narrow is me every day when I look at this. It's usually not in my living room, but we've been doing building work. It's a reminder to me that I'm a work in progress.
Yeah.
And each decision we make as Christians becomes a social contract with God, which we either honor or we kind of make choices to avoid, or we justify with a little narrative we hear over here, or we do all these other things. And I think that's where Cugoano's voice goes over time. That's the relevance of his time. He's saying, listen, you've got to make choices.
Yeah.
You've got to question. You can't just accept things. This is what reality really is. I mean, this is what, the reality of slavery really is. And to me, it's interesting that after him, there is kind of, and the sons of African, all the things, there is kind of a lull and they go out of history. They go out and then there is a resurgence back to him. And I think that speaks to the power of the voice and the power of power of our theology, I would think, in realizing that like that, we are like my little thing, we're also a work in progress. The Church of England is a work in progress. We can only keep working towards God and God's tenets and,
And that's a commitment.
That is a commitment. It's a hard one.
I like what you're saying about recognizing what kinds of choices and what kinds of agency each of us has. If we are committed to living out the promises of our baptism, then therefore we must be committed to recognizing the dignity of every human being. And that is, I experience this as being like tragically countercultural. That should never be difficult to do. And yet we seem to be confronted again and again, historically and now, with truths as well, perhaps, as opportunities to be able to recognize the faults and the fragmentations of the human choices, collectively, individually, that have allowed for injustice to continue, to be the people who recognize it, who learn, and then say no. Yes. So maybe these kinds of moments around Kwabna Ottawa Cugoano can be a prompt for each
Yes.
person to remember, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And how does that reflect an understanding of being made in the image of God, with all that comes with, all that
Exactly.
comes with. I'm
Exactly.
so grateful that you wanted to have this conversation. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Ayla. Thank you for
And
having me.
I'd love to know, is there anything more that you would like to share, something that's on your mind, on your heart, that you want to ensure is heard in this conversation?
I think I would like, I would say to people that there is this idea of contested heritage as being, the new Reformation, and we're all iconoclastic or something like this. And I want to say that it's very much, we also make choices, and we make choices with people. We make choices because there are people who, because this is such a silent history, do not understand the full depth of what has happened and why a particular monument can be triggering, emotionally harming, but at the same time are conflicted because they see this as part of their church. And we're there to help navigate both parties. We're there to make sure that there's a safe space for both. Contested heritage does not mean that there is a one size that fits all. It means working through things as Christians and together, and recognizing there are competing narratives. And let's find out what the truths, the justices, the listening process is for both of us. And I think that's when we kind of, especially in the church setting, that's when we come into our Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
With regards to objects, anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your interest, I suppose, in wanting to be able to have this conversation in
Well, I adore
all
St.
you
James
do and all
Piccadilly.
you want to
I
share.
love your programming. I love your outlook. I think you're really very much in the world. And you speak to people about their spirituality, but you do such, in addition to talk the talk, what you do is you walk the walk in terms of the program and doing this. So by all means, my privilege to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. We walk this walk together, Novelette.
Oh,
Every
right.
blessing. Thanks again. Take care.
Bye-bye. All the best.
Bye.
Bye. Oh.